When you play the Game of Thrones,
Subscribe and like.
you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, welcome back to Bran 3, A Clash of Kings. Now before we get into the video, I wanted to explain some things for new viewers on this channel, people that don't know my content from my main channel. This series is the series I'm currently working on. So I started this series with a Game of Thrones, like you guys are seeing. I'm uploading those basically every day. Those are being re-uploaded from my main channel onto here because I want this to be my reread channel. So for 6 out of the 7 days of the week, we're going to be doing the Game of Thrones rereads until that's caught up. I'm going to smush like all my Clash of Kings like reread chapters into a big video, probably after this week's video, just so people that maybe aren't caught up with the Clash of Kings can get caught up. I know it's a little confusing because I'm trying to balance a new audience with also my previous audience that I have on my main channel who've already seen the Game of Thrones reread. They're watching for the Clash of Kings reread. So again, if you don't want to watch the Clash of Kings rereads, want to wait till the Game of Thrones rereads are done, that is totally up to you. Again, that reread will be finished and probably up on the channel for you guys probably in the next like month and a half if I'm daily uploading those, which I plan to do. But let's not waste any more time. I just want to give a little explanation for maybe people that are new and have never seen me or my content before this channel. So let's get into page 244 of Bran 3. Bran is dressed in gray and white, wearing a silver and jet wolf's head brooch. Though he would rather have his direwolf Summer by his side, Sir Roderick, however, insisted on the formal attire. One thing I will say about Bran is he looks very fashionably. Something that I think the show didn't necessarily do all that much is play on how richly the Starks are, right? Bran looks quite rich here. He looks the part of being a princeling or a lordling. His horse Dancer, adorned in stark barding, hesitates briefly at the stone steps, but quickly overcomes them. Inside Winterfell's great hall, 8 long rows of trestle tables are packed with men who rise and cheer as Bran rides past, calling out Stark in Winterfell. Something that Bran has not really experienced much in the first 2 books is people looking at him and applauding or giving praise to him. Every time people look at him, it's to look at his physical condition, to stare at him, weirdly or with pity. He's never looked at as a regular kid. And so during this very few moments, Bran feels like a person. Even though Bran understands that the cheers are not truly for him, but for the harvest, Robb's victories, and the legacy of House Stark, he still feels pride. He's still representing his house. He is the Lord of Winterfell until Robb gets back. As he reaches the dais, Osha and Hodor unstrap him from Dancer and carry him to the high seat of his fathers, making him once again aware of his broken body. It's that comeback to realization. He can't really get off of his horse without help. He is somebody that doesn't feel completely whole. It's one of the reasons that, the Blood Raven, I would say manipulation, or maybe the Three-Eyed Crow, whatever you want to go with, that manipulation works so well on Bran because Bran so desperately wants to be a normal, kid. He wants to be able to walk and run and not have to rely on people. And it's why I think that plotline actually is able to work well with Bran's. And it's also why I think when he actually, gets to a dance with dragons, my favorite part of Bran's plotline, it's so much more tragic because you have chapters like this where Bran was expecting to be able to be kind of almost a normal kid, maybe with also being able to do, warging and things, but he wasn't able to be taught to walk or to run. So Roderick sits to Bran's left with his daughter Beth, while Rickon, with his shaggy auburn hair brushing against his ermine mantle, sits to his right. And that'll get us into page 245. Rickon had refused to have his hair cut since their mother left, once biting a girl who tried. As Hodor led Dancer away, he complained that he wanted to ride too, and claimed he was better than Bran. For one, I highly doubt it because Rickon is, I believe he's 4 at this age. I don't remember exactly if I think he's 3 or 4 at this point, but probably shouldn't be riding a horse. And also the other part of it, I think it's interesting because we already see, a lot of these subtle foreshadowings to what Davos is going to have to experience in the Winds of Winter. If he's going to try and get Rickon out of Skagos, he's going to have to deal with somebody who's not necessarily trusting of others, even for someone to cut his hair. He's somebody that's very wild and not very able to be tamed, and so that could lead to a lot of difficult situations for Davos in the Winds of Winter. Bran dismissed his brother's protest, then raised his voice to welcome the gathered men in Robb's name, giving thanks for his victories and the harvest before, raising his father's silver goblet in a toast. It must feel very weird for Bran. This is something that, his father would have been doing, when he was growing up, and then Robb had to do this, and now it's trickled all the way down to Bran. Bran is no longer able to play the boy. He's never able to be kind of like Rickon, who is just a kid, right? Bran has to be the Lord of Winterfell and has to not show emotion like sadness and things like that. The hall erupted into cheers as cups and tankards clashed together. Bran's wine, sweetened with honey and spiced with cinnamon and cloves, was stronger than he expected, making his head swim. A boy this young having alcohol. You can imagine what that would do to him, especially, at his age. If you can remember the first time you had alcohol, just imagine that, but also medieval times where alcohol is much stronger. There's not as much, depending on what kind of alcohol you're getting, it's not as, tasting great. Like, for instance, I'm a wine drinker if I drink at all. I really don't drink much, pretty much ever, outside of maybe social events here and there. But wine nowadays is going to taste probably a lot better than wine back in the day, because wine now, you don't taste the alcohol as much. And so I know everybody has their different tastes on alcohol. I brought that up in a past chapter about beers, so I'll let everybody make their own ideas about that. Sir Roderick praised Bran's words, telling him that Lord Eddard would have been proud, and Maester Luwin nodded in agreement as the feast began. Really big words for Bran, who's trying to live up to that Stark persona and trying to be the Lord of Winterfell. The meal was extravagant, with many different things being served, like venison pies, honey-sauced mutton, duck, boar, goose, skewers of pigeon and capon, beef and barley stew, and an array of fish from White Harbor. There were also breads, biscuits, vegetables, fruit dishes, and cheeses at every table, accompanied by hot spiced wine and chilled autumn ale. You really get the sense that this is a really, big feast. It's not like as big as, say, we're going to see with things like the Purple Wedding, for instance, but a lot of great food descriptions that makes you hungry. Thanks, George. As I'm recording this, I am a bit hungry now, but oh well. George likes to give us his food descriptions. I mean, this is why YouTubers are able to make tier lists on his food descriptions. So again, I'd probably put this one quite high. But it also tells you some of the richness of the North, right? We're still in the early stages of the war, and the North for right now can still feed itself quite well. They are they are the nation, or I should say the kingdom, I don't know why I said nation, that again tries to preserve food for winter the most because winter hits them the hardest. It's kind of a little bit of that, right? Where even the North still does have extravagant feasts like this. They also, I feel like, maybe earn it a bit more because they save their food. Lord Wyman's musicians played well, but their music was soon drowned by the lively clamor of voices, laughter, and hounds snarling over scraps. The singer performed familiar songs, but only Hodor paid attention, hopping excitedly beside the piper. Again, remember what we hear about with characters like Sansa. The reason she wants to go south so much in Book 1 is because she, doesn't get singers. This is a very rare occurrence that there are being, musicians or things like that in the North. And so when you think about that, one, it kind of tells you, the Manderleys have origins in the South, and so it maybe can be a hint to their Southern ties or their origin for their house. It also could be another thing where it's just showing you how big of an event this is. A lot of the Northern Lords that are still available in the North coming to Winterfell. It's such an extravagant, feast that we have musicians playing. It's a really interesting moment because it contrasts a lot of what we get with the North, in Book 1, or even what we're told about the North. The noise became a steady roar of conversation, with Sir Roderick speaking to Maester Luwin, while Rickon joyfully screamed at the Frey boys. Bran had not wanted the Walders at the high table, but Maester Luwin reminded him that they would soon be his family, with Robb set to marry one of their aunts and Arya one of their uncles. Bran, unconvinced, insisted that Arya never would, but the Maester would not budge. Bran knows his sister may be better than Luwin does, or at least Luwin is not willing to admit that this is probably a bad betrothal. Anyone that knows Arya, one, if anyone she was going to marry, she would not marry a Frey. Could you imagine Arya's personality with a Frey? That Frey would be dead on their wedding night. So already, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. It kind of even goes back to Book 1 when we talked about Catelyn and how she was making a deal with Walder Frey. This is one of those conditions where I can almost see being kind of an interesting move, right? Because we know that Arya is missing, and a lot of people presume that she's dead. During a Game of Thrones, point, I don't think people would have considered her dead yet. But like, again, as the books go on, even when we'll see like kind of into Clash of Kings, the later stages of it, and especially Storm of Swords, most people believe that she's just dead at this point. It's actually not a bad like deal, because in one hand, if you do find Arya, likely the war is going to be over by the time you get her back, especially if you believe that she's still in King's Landing and Cersei has her, then you probably won't get her till the very end of the war. And so if that was the case, well, by the end of the war, you don't necessarily need the Freys as much as you did during the war. That's why Robb's breaking of the alliance when he marries Jane Westerling is so important, because it's during the war. Something like Arya, could always be revoked. It could always be like, well, Walder Frey, you're married to the King of the North. You might just have to bite the bullet on this one. That'll get us into page 246. And another thing I want to notice right away is, Bran is right to distrust the Freys. I know I have some viewers, especially on my main channel, that are big Frey supporters, but the Freys, and especially the ones here, are not the most likable Freys. They also kind of try to bully Bran at times, even when Bran is the Lord of Winterfell. You understand why Bran doesn't want them here. It's, again, being on the high dais, with the Lord of Winterfell and, his brother, that's a very big high place of honor. But getting into page 246, the servingmen brought each dish to Bran first, offering him the Lord's portion, but by the time the ducks arrived, he was too full to eat. Bran is still a young boy. He doesn't have a big stomach, and can you imagine, like, all these different dishes coming to you? Like, it'd be overwhelming. And for me, it's something where I'd want to eat at least a little bit of every single thing, but it wouldn't end up working because you're eating everything, right? You would just run out of room really quick. I'm somebody, as I've gotten older, now I don't know, I've been having some recent issues with, I think, some acid reflux issues, and it's kind of messed up, I think, my digestive system and things like that. I just cannot eat like large meals like I could when I was younger. And a lot of that comes down to when I was younger, I didn't take care of myself. So if you are, a younger person, I mean, people still consider me a younger person. I'm going to be 25, but if you're, in high school, you're 16, 17, I really highly recommend you take care of yourself. Take care of your body, take care of your mentals, take care of all those things, because you take those things for granted and eventually, things can happen. That's all I'll say. But instead, Bran nodded approval at each course and waved it away, occasionally sending dishes as gifts to lords and retainers, as Maester Luwin advised, giving them honors, right? Giving them their first dibs at meals and things like that. He sent salmon to Lady Hornwood, boar to the Umbers, goose and berries to Clay Kerwin, and a large lobster to Joseph, the Master of Horse, as thanks for training Dancer. Out of love, he also sent sweets to Hodor and Old Nan, and at Sir Roderick's reminder, he sent boiled beets to Little Walder and buttered turnips to Big Walder. This, if Tommen was here, this would be punishable by death. Bran would be put to death for some nonsense like this, but I can't lie, Bran is quite clever. He's still sending them food. He's still doing them an honor. This might not be the kind of food that you want. Below the dais, Winterfell men mingled with small folk and the entourages of visiting lords. Bran observed them all, feeling distant, as if watching from his chamber window, rather than being part of the feast. Again, Bran is somebody that is forced into the position where he can't do what he wants without help. He's forced to watch others and see what they're doing. And maybe that can be entertaining to just people watch. I know people love to do that. I, to a degree, like to do that at times. But when that's really the only thing you can do, you can't, go and talk to, Lady Hornwood or go talk to the Umber. You can't get up and do those things. You can't, do whatever you want to do, right? It just feels like, I understand and I feel for Bran a lot, because he's in this position where he feels alone, but at the same time has to be present because he is the Lord of Winterfell. Osha poured ale among the tables, breaking a flagon over a man's head when he groped her, drawing laughter while others indulged in more welcome flirtations. Another thing Bran's not really going to understand is sex and things like that. We're going to see really more of a blatant example later on in the chapter, but at this point, again, Bran doesn't understand the inner workings of a feast and a gathering like this. Farland amused himself by making his red bitch beg for bones, and old Nan picked at a hot pie with her wrinkled fingers. At the high table, Lord Wyman was so large that a special chair had been built for him, devoured his pies with enthusiasm, laughing heartily, while Lady Hornwood sat beside him, barely touching her food. Very different things going on. You have some people that are worried about, their animals, for instance. Some you have worried about the pies. Some you have worried about women. Others, like Lady Hornwood, feels, alone. She's kind of being forced to marry somebody, and she hasn't really picked anyone. She knows Ramsay is on her doorstep and possibly could take over her lands. There's not much to really be happy about if you're Lady Hornwood. And it's something where, as somebody who has gone through depression, one of the moments that I remember a lot from being depressed is on an event similar to this. Now, not like a feast, a medieval feast, but, something like New Year's Eve party. I remember this distinctively, just feeling completely checked out, not wanting to be there, and just feeling alone. That's what I feel a lot of what Lady Hornwood would be feeling in this moment, where everybody else around you seems to be having fun, and you're questioning, why can't you feel those things? Why am I backed into the corner that I am, right, with how Lady Hornwood's situation is? At the other end of the table, Hothan and Moors engaged in a rowdy drinking game, slamming their horns together like knights in a joust. The hall grew too hot and loud for Bran, and he longed for the godswood, picturing the rising steam from the hot pools, the rustling red leaves of the weirwood, and his brother's song under the moon. Now, what Bran does not realize here is that he actually is warging into summer at this point. He's never been able to do this, been able to really control it. Has he been able to do it in his dreams? Yes, but this is the real first indication of Bran being able to almost willingly go into one of these dreams or going into warging and using his power. Is this a coincidence with the Reeds showing up in this very chapter? I'm not sure. But it is interesting because in a lot of ways, Bran 3 is the beginning of the real awakening for Bran. We've gotten hints at this each and every chapter. I would say after Robb leaves Winterfell is really where the magic part of Bran's arc starts to get going. I know you see in Bran 3 in Book 1, which is probably my least favorite chapter of Book 1, where you see him get, his eye awakened, his third eye. But we don't really follow up on that until Book 2, and this is kind of where that starts to get going. Sir Roderick seemed to notice Bran's distraction and asked why he was not eating. And obviously we know why, because Bran really wasn't present there. He was in another life, more or less. And so that gets us into page 247. Bran momentarily lost himself, almost waking in a dream. It seemed so vivid that he forgot where he was, assuring Sir Roderick that he would eat more later as his belly was full. If you're Bran, this has to be really weird. You didn't just fall asleep. You were in some sort of a lifelike dream. It's going to prompt Bran into thinking about some things. Can he do this consciously? Can he do it on his own will, not just in dreams? Sir Roderick, his mustache stained pink with wine, praised Bran for his performance at his feast and in his duties, predicting he would be a fine lord one day. But Bran doesn't want to be a lord. Bran has been thrust into this role and having to do all these duties, but it's not what he wants. And I think so many people, especially in medieval times, especially in the world of Westeros, don't get to be what they want to be. They're forced into positions. And you think about Robb in Book 1 and his relationship with Bran, I think that really intensifies what that means. Robb did not ask to have to leave the north to go south, become the Lord of Winterfell. I think that one of the most powerful emotional moments of Book 1, that is by far the most underrated moment, in my opinion, of Book 1, I cannot believe they omitted it from the television show, is when Robb and Bran embrace, and Robb is seen, crying and tearing up. That is kind of what I think Bran is, realizing. I think he's starting to understand his brother a lot more, because Bran has always envisioned himself as being a knight. And that now seems like a dream. He sipped from his father's goblet, feeling the raised direwolf snout against his palm, and recalling the last time he had seen Lord Eddard drink from it. His memory carried him back to the welcoming feast for King Robert, when summer still reigned and his family had been whole. His parents had sat with the king and queen. Arya had made faces across the table. Sansa had been enchanted by the songs of chivalry, and Rickon had asked why Jon wasn't with them. It tells you the story of a family that's now fractured, right? Everyone having their distinct personalities and some people not getting along and creating, issues. Arya kind of being that little troublemaker character. It reminds you of the good time that we're not even that far removed, right? We're only, if you think about it, we're at what? If you go back basically one full book, we're back in those moments. And so I think it's interesting when you think about where we're going to go with the story, right? Our characters are only going to get further apart. Some of these people are going to die that Bran's talking about. The family is going to become more fractured than it's going to become whole very shortly. Bran thinks how they were now all gone. His sisters, captives, and in Arya's case, again, they don't know this, but she's on the run. Jon at the wall, his mother and Robb at war, his father and King Robert dead, and even Uncle Benjen lost beyond the wall. The family is completely shattered, but it goes further than that. Bran's, family wasn't just the people he's related to blood-wise. It's the people that he used to know, right? The familiar faces from his father's household that had disappeared as well. Jory, Fat Tom, Alan, Desmond, Hullen, Harwin, and even Septa Mordain. Screw Septa Mordain. Not a good person. And every time her name comes up, we're gonna draw attention to it because she is a horrible teacher and someone that basically abuses children mentally, psychologically. So, yeah. And Vayon Poole were either dead or gone with Robb. Those who remained were new men, Hayhead, Poxy Tim, and Skitrick. Very interesting names, whom Bran liked well enough, but did not truly know. These are men that have not been here all that long, or that Bran has interacted with much at all. He can't necessarily trust them. Looking around the hall at the gathered faces, he wondered who else would be gone next year and the year after, but he held back his tears. He was the Stark in Winterfell now, his father's son, his brother's heir, and almost a man grown. It's this. This is what I think is some of the best parts of this chapter and Bran as a whole. Bran understanding that we're at war. Winter is coming. A lot of these men, in a year or two, or maybe more, will be gone. You even think about the end result of this book. Winterfell will be put to the shore. Winterfell will be, burned and put to the sword. Some will be captured and go to the Dreadfort. We don't know what their fate necessarily is. A lot of them probably tortured and killed. But Bran is completely right. It's hard to understand what's going to happen in the middle of a war. But at this, a sudden gust of cold air swept through the halls as the doors opened, momentarily brightening the torches, and an ale belly let in 2 guests. The guardsmen announced them loudly over the noise, Lady Mira Reed and her brother, Jojen, of Greywater Watch. The hall turned to study the newcomers, and Bran overheard little Walder mutter, "Frog eaters," to big Walder in disdain. And I think Bran will relate to the Reeds a lot. The people there kind of look at them like how they view Bran, as someone that's inhuman, that is getting these stares of, looking at them weirdly. I think Bran would have a lot of sympathy for the Reeds, and he shows that kind of right away. Sir Roderick goes into action, standing to welcome them warmly, inviting them to share in the harvest feast as servants rush to lengthen the table on the dais. That gets us into page 248. Rickon, curious, asked who the newcomers were, and little Waller dismissed them as mudmen, claiming they were thieves and cowards with green teeth from eating frogs. Big words from a house that basically lives because they just get taxes off people crossing a bridge. Big words from them, all I'm going to say. But you can see where the tensions would be. You think about the position of where the Freys are. You think about the position of where the Reeds are. Very close in proximity. You could have seen maybe throughout, the years, there could have been some tensions in terms of border disputes and how close they are. Maybe just 2 families that would not like each other much. And it's not hard to not like the Freys. Almost every house hates the Freys. But, same. But that is something that I think a lot of people would think about. How the Reeds are people that don't live traditional lives compared to the rest of Westeros. Maester Luwin crouched beside Bran, advising him to greet them warmly and asking if he knew who they were. He nodded, recognizing them as Crannogmen from the neck. Now, one thing I want to point out. I know that we love Maester Luwin. I think he is good-hearted. I think that, for the most part, Luwin does good things, right? But I think at the same time, I want you to think about the image that pops up when I say Maester Luwin crouched beside Bran, advising him. I don't know why, and maybe it's because I have a very big hatred for the Maesters, but if you think about other Maesters that aren't not as good as Lewin, who aren't as, good-hearted or good people like Lewin seems to be doing this, think about the influence the Maesters have, the whispering in the Lord's ears, right? A lot of why I think that Grand Maester conspiracy theory works as well as it does, because George paints these things like, this is kind of like Grima Wormtongue with Theoden King in the books or the movies for Lord of the Rings. It's kind of the picture I get, even though it is Lewin. Sir Roger confirmed that their father, Howland Reed, had been a close friend of Lord Eddard, and these two appeared to be his children. As they walked down the hall, Bran observed the girl's unusual appearance. She isn't dressed like a normal woman in this world would be. She was dressed in lambskin breeches and a sleeveless jerkin of bronze scales. She carried weapons and a net, looking more like a boy than a lady, something that would also bring the stares of the people around her. It's something that Bran might actually really like about Mira because of how different she is from the traditional women. Her younger brother, dressed entirely in green, bore no weapons, and when he came closer, Bran noticed his moss-colored eyes. Though his teeth were as white as anyone else's, both were slender and only slightly taller than Bran himself. Paints the idea of these people being very kind of smaller people. I think that's very interesting. And something I think is interesting is, the children of the forest, the way they're described as being childlike. It is interesting. You think about the Reeds, and it seems like their apparent connection with the old gods, and the children of the forest and things like that. It's really interesting the comparison we get, even the color that Jojen is wearing, the green color. It's really interesting when you think about what we're going to see later on with Jojen possibly becoming Jojen paste in A Dance with Dragons. When they reached the dais, they knelt, and the girl spoke formally, recalling that her people had sworn fealty to the kings in the north for thousands of years. She explained that their father had sent them to renew that oath on behalf of their people. Bran, realizing she was looking directly at him, responded that Robb was fighting in the south, but that they could say their words to him instead. Together, the Reeds pledged the faith of Greywater, offering their loyalty, weapons, and resources to House Stark, vowing to uphold mercy, aid, and justice. The boy swore by earth and water, the girl by bronze and iron, and together they concluded by swearing by ice and fire. Now, where do these words come from? Because these are strange to say the least. All these other houses, they may make similar claims, vowing to uphold mercy, aid, and justice, and those things, but they wouldn't say it in this manner. This seems to be a very old saying, right? Swearing on the elements, things that are very close to the old gods, something that, in the World of Ice and Fire book, that's something made very apparent, right? That the old gods, the children of the forest, believed in gods of the nature, right? And so, this idea that we're swearing by things like earth and water and ice and fire. And again, the series being called The Song of Ice and Fire, this is really apparent. And the fact that this gets brought up in a Bran plotline, and we think that Bran will have a very big importance in the coming story in A Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring, I think that's really important to understand here, that this phrase gets brought up in Bran 3, A Clash of Kings. And this is even made more unusual because Bran doesn't know what the proper response to this is. Nobody has prepped him for these words. Nobody has told him this was a common saying by the Reeds or anything like that. Again, shows you something a little different here. It's to kind of, I think it's in a lot of ways Howland telling his children, what this means and how Bran is very important to them. And also maybe of what is to come with the character of Bran Stark. Bran wished them short winters and bountiful summers, thinking it was a safe reply before introducing himself as Brandon Stark. It is a very safe reply, right? Everybody wants to have a lot of food and to have very short winter, right? Not a lot of suffering and dying. When the main thing in the north that people are considering is the winter, it's a pretty safe saying, right? It's pretty safe. Maybe not the proper saying to what they said back to him, but it is, I think, an appropriate response. As we get into page 249, Amira helped her brother to his feet, but Jojen continued to stare at Bran as he formally presented gifts of fish, frog, and fowl. Bran thanked them, but wondered if he would have to eat a frog to be polite, before offering them the meat and mead of Winterfell and returned. He recalled what little he knew of the Crannogmen, poor fisher folk and frog hunters who live in floating islands in the neck, rumored to be cowards who fought with poison and avoided open battle. Okay, but here's the thing. If you are a very small built, if you are a very poor, area, if you're a very, poorly built for combat, right? You think about the reeds, they're very small. You're going to do ways of defending your land that you can actually defend them. It's going to be by using poison, by doing more guerrilla tactics. It's kind of the same rep the Dornish get, and it's just like, you people are just mad that they are beating you with unorthodox methods. It's the same way that warfare has changed over the years of history, right? Different strategies come up. You think about Vietnam, right? The Vietnam War, very similar situation where you have, America using more modern philosophies of warfare and the other side not doing that, right? Doing more guerrilla tactics. Kind of the same idea with, I would say, the neck. But Bran recalls that their father, Howland Reed, had been one of Lord Eddard Stark's most loyal companions during Robert's Rebellion. We don't know a lot about this situation. We can, get some conclusions from the evidence that we do have, but we're still unclear on what Howland's role was. As Jojen took his seat, he curiously asked where the direwolves were, and Rickon answered that they were in the Godswood because Shaggy Dog had misbehaved. Mira mentioned that Jojen wanted to see them, prompting Little Walder to taunt that he had better be careful or the wolves might bite him. It's really interesting because you think about Jojen and you think about Mira. They're two people that have not come to Winterfell before. The Reeds as a whole do not come to Winterfell at all. They seem to only stay in the neck. And the first thing they ask is about the direwolves. Really weird thing for your first conversation with the Lords of Winterfell. Bran assured them that Summer wouldn't bite and he would keep Shaggy Dog away. Pleased that they were interested in the wolves, he found himself fascinated by the Reed siblings, having never met a Crannogmen before. It's something where Bran can relate to them, right? These Crannogmen are not very normal. They get very suspicious looks. People look down on them. All the same things that Bran himself gets from these same people. And so Bran is going to like them because they're taking interest in things he likes. Now, maybe that's just a move by the Reeds to get, Bran to like them more because he is their main objective, more or less. It kind of makes sense that they would ask about the direwolves when you put it into that context. Curious about their diet, he asked Sir Roderick if they truly ate frogs, and the old knight confirmed that they did, along with fish, birds, and even lizard lions. And hey, they've got to feed themselves, just like everybody else has to feed themselves. They aren't a place where you're going to be able to make a lot of money off of trade like White Harbor. They're not a place where there would be a lot of, normal animals that you would hunt or be able to even maybe grow vegetables and things like that easily. You have to make do with what you can. Thinking that they might lack sheep and cattle, Bran instructed the servants to bring them more meats like mutton and beef and barley stew, which they seemed to enjoy. This is a delicacy that the Reeds probably haven't had much of, and so they would very much appreciate it. But Bran then goes a little step forward because not only is Bran interested in the Reeds, he seems to already be developing a crush for Mira. As Mira catches Bran staring at her, she smiled, making him blush and quickly look away. I don't know why, but this reminded me so much of like crushes that I had when I was, maybe in grade school or younger years in school. There's just like, I can just remember like points where I remember where I'd be like, oh, I have a really big crush on this girl and you can't stop staring at them. And then you get that awkward moment where they look at you. Now, I didn't have what Bran had, right? Again, Bran's a lord and Mira smiles back. Half the time, okay, it wasn't that. It was just like, why are you staring at me kind of look. And it's like, I get it, right? I get it. Why was I staring at them? I don't know. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of things from this Bran chapter that remind me of younger years. But later in the night, after the feast sweets had been washed down with summer wine, the tables were cleared to make room for dancing. Another thing that would make Bran feel alone and feel like he's watching others. Physical activity, Bran really can't do. The music became wilder with drummers joining in. Hother Umber produced a massive silver-banded war horn. This is very interesting. Very important. But when the singer reached the climactic moment in the night that ended, where the Night's Watch rode to battle against the others, Umber blew the horn in a great blast that set all the dogs barking. This is something that I did not remember. When I reread this, I found this to be very fascinating because it would imply that there was some horn used to signal the attack of the Night's Watch. It was put a lot of significance on in this moment that Umber blows his horn. Now, is this just something that's a throwaway? Is it just, oh yeah, well, obviously in battle, horns would signal an attack? Is this more? The Winds of Winter, the proposed, book cover that is most commonly used in thumbnails and artwork and things like that, has this Horn of Winter on it. Is this maybe a reference to that? Is this more than that, right? To imply that the Horn of Winter may be a part of why this battle with the others begins, or will Dragonbinder, another, famous horn that we have in this series, will it have some effect on the war with the others? It's not yet clear. It's a very interesting point here that George brings up here that I really feel like it's not talked about all that much in the community, something that I completely forgot that this even happens, which I don't think is that hard to do, given it's a Bran chapter in A Clash of Kings. Sorry, my Bran lovers, but Bran is not my favorite in this book, even though I don't think he's necessarily bad either. As the music quickened with a lively tune from the Glovermen, Moore's Umber was the first to leap up, grabbing a passing serving girl and twirling her so wildly that her skirts lifted as she laughed and blushed. Others soon joined the dancing. Hodor moved on his own, while Lord Wyman, despite his size, danced gracefully with little Beth Cassell before passing her to Clay Kerwin when he tired. Again, it's Lord Wyman is somebody that, again, looks are not everything. Lord Wyman is still able to dance despite his size, and people underestimate him all the time, something that will be a really big plot point in Dance with Dragons. Again, there's a lot of things in this chapter that foreshadow Dance because of the northern politics, right? We don't see a lot of the main characters, the northern politics stuff come into effect, throughout A Storm of Swords, really. We don't see it, after a lot of these moments in A Clash of Kings because, well, obviously we know what's going to happen there. So there is a lot of the groundwork for the northern politics being built, in this chapter and the previous chapter. Sir Roderick tried to approach Lady Hornwood for a dance, but she declined and excused herself from the feast. I don't blame Lady Hornwood. I wouldn't want to dance either, given the fact that, yes, Sir Roderick is making a nice gesture, but Sir Roderick isn't going to marry Lady Hornwood. We've already established that, so what's the point? It's just reminding Lady Hornwood of her situation. Bran watched for a while out of politeness, but soon grew tired, flushed from wine and saddened by the dancing, which reminded him of something he could never do, and he summoned Hodor. Again, it's a very depressing moment for Bran. Not even being able to do just normal things. And you think about, in our own time, we have more modern medicine to, help cope with things that Bran's dealing with. There's just more entertainment for someone, for Bran. There would be more entertainment for Bran to do without having to be physically able to do those things. There would be, more career paths or things that Bran could do with his life that he may enjoy. Here, there just aren't those things, right? Being somebody in Bran's situation is really detrimental. It really limits what you're able to do with your life. And Bran is lucky that he's a lord, right? But if he wasn't a lord, what would he be able to do? As Hodor knelt, Maester Luwin and Hayhead lifted Bran into his basket. Though the sight was familiar to Winterfell's folk, many guests stared at him with curiosity. To avoid walking through the entire hall through the weight of their gazes, they exited through the Lord's door into the dimly lit gallery. You can't blame Bran, getting all these stares once again, and he's still just not used to it. Nobody's ever really going to get used to some of those things, some of the things that Tyrion deals with quite a lot. There they encountered Joseph, the Master of Horse. I want to say that on my first reading of that script line, I said the Master of Horniness, or I basically started to say that. So, that was a pretty little funny blooper for me that I may post one day. But in the midst of a passionate encounter with a woman, Bran did not recognize. She giggled until Hodor stopped to watch, then screamed, "Hodor, Hodor, maybe he just wanted to watch." I don't know. Bran obviously doesn't really understand exactly what's going on here, but yeah, very weird scene. You're okay. For one, why are you getting it on in the stairway? Could you not have found a room, any semblance of privacy? You're gonna do it right on the stairway? Bold choice, but then even bolder choice by Hodor to stop and watch. George was on something when he was writing this. That's all I'm gonna say. Bran quickly instructed Hodor to leave them be and take him to his bedchamber. Hodor carried him up to the winding steps, knelt beside the iron bars Mycon had driven into the wall, and helped Bran move onto his bed before pulling off his boots and breeches. Dismissing him, Bran warned Hodor to not bother Joseph and the woman again, to which Hodor simply nodded and replied, Hodor. We don't know what occurred after this. Hodor could have went back and was watching, but he was a little bit more secretive this time. The darker side of Hodor that people do not explore. But yeah, blowing out his bedside candle, Bran let the familiar darkness settle over him, faint traces of music still drifting in through his shuttered windows. A childhood memory suddenly surfaced, his father once telling him that while the Kingsguard were no longer what they had been, they had once been a marvel, a shining lesson to the world. Again, the decline of the Kingsguard is a really big emphasis, I would say, of Book 1. You know, how far we've fallen, right? And you think about the knights that were in the Kingsguard for Eris. It's a huge decline to where we are now. Curious, Bran had asked his father if there had been one knight who was the best of all. This gets us into page 251, but Bran recalled his father once telling him that the finest knight he had ever seen was Sir Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning, who wielded a legendary blade called Dawn, forged from the heart of a fallen star. And again, for me, it's interesting that Arthur Dayne gets brought up here. Something happened between Howland, Ned, and Arthur Dayne. As of right now, it's unclear, but it seems like the story is that Howland probably helped kill Arthur Dayne in some manner that saved Ned's life. Bran remembers his father telling him that Sir Arthur would have killed him if not for Howland Reed, but he had grown sad and refused to say more, leaving Bran wishing he'd asked what he meant. What was so bad that made Ned sad? Was it the killing of Arthur Dayne? Was it Arthur Dayne being allowed to live, but Arthur's fate of exile or Shara's death following it, his sister's death, Jon's life? There's a lot here that would remind Ned of bad memories and things that happened during Robert's Rebellion, and the conclusion that would make him not want to talk about it. That night, Bran fell asleep, imagining knights in shining armor and their swords glowing like starfire. But his dreams took him elsewhere, back to the Godswood. Could Bran also be seeing the future of the war with the others and knights with maybe shining armor and swords with, all these Valyrian swords being used to defeat the others with characters like Jon Snow, for instance? The sense of the feast still lingered into the air, and he prowled beneath the trees with his brother close behind, restless with the howls of the man-pack filling the night. Bran, once again, warging into summer. These are becoming more frequent, it seems, and his power is growing stronger with the reeds being around. A rattle of iron caught his attention, making his ears prick up. He and his brothers raced through the undergrowth toward the sound, bounding across the still water near the ancient tree. Someone was unlocking the gate or the door to get to the wolves, but who would be doing this? No one was really being permitted to see the wolves. Who was it? The scent of a stranger reached him, human, mixed with leather, earth, and iron. He came upon two intruders who ventured a few yards into the Godswood, a female and a young male, both standing their ground even as he bared his teeth. We know this to be Jojen and Mira, but how did they get in here? Did they sneak in? Were they allowed to get in through the guards? Did the guards allow them to get in? How did they get in here to begin with? His brother growled low, but still they did not run. The girl Mira recognized their approach and asked if her companion had expected them to be so big. Now, what I think is fascinating, Bran within his direwolf, Summer, is able to connect his thoughts to Summer's, that this is Mira. That's important to understand because other people that warg are not necessarily able to do that so early on, right? Bran is still very early into his warging abilities, but he's able to connect his human mind with his wolf's mind. Bran then recognizes the boy to be Jojen, replying that they would grow even larger, and observed that the black wolf was full of fear and rage, while the gray one was stronger than he knew. How does Jojen know these things, right? And that's something, if you're Bran, you got to think about. How does Jojen seem to understand the wolves' personalities and how that reflects onto both Rickon and Bran? Really interesting, but it also tells you that Jojen is confident that he can interact with the wolves or interact with people warging the wolves and make them, not attack him. Mira admitted she cannot feel the wolf's presence as Jojen could, and when she moved a hand toward her knife, he told her to be careful. Jojen, however, was fearless, stating that this was not the day he would die. Very interesting. You know, is this his overconfidence in his, is this confidence in his abilities, or is this that he's seen his own death? He knows when he will truly die, and this is not the time. I believe it's more the latter. I think there is confidence in Jojen's own abilities as well, but I think it's Jojen knows what his role is to play, and unfortunately that is not here. He stepped forward and lightly reached out to touch the wolf's muzzle. At the brush of his fingers, the gods would dissolve, the ground beneath Bran turning to smoke and swirling away with laughter. Then he was spinning and falling, falling, falling. This is very interesting, because something that Jojen does here takes Bran's ability to warg Summer out of him, right? He's not able to do that. Something that shows that Jojen has some power. There is something there. And that should be really impactful for a character like Bran right away. Not only are the Crannogmen very weird, just in terms of normal Westerosi type people, and even people in the north, they seem to have some sort of magic, some ability to interrupt Bran's warging power with Summer. But again, thank you guys all for watching. I really did enjoy this Bran chapter. I know it's not, hitting the heights of other chapters in, this book, especially, getting into Catelyn. One of my favorite POVs of the book in the next chapter. We haven't seen her in a very long time. And getting to the Renly, and Stannis conflict, which is where I think this book really starts to hit its peaks. I think Clash of Kings is a good book to start. But I think if you compare it to Game of Thrones is a much better start, in my opinion, to its book than, say, a Clash of Kings is. But this is the section of a Clash of Kings where I really start to feel like a Clash of Kings starts to then take those leaps of why it's my favorite book. A Game of Thrones is my third favorite book. So when I say, again, Clash of Kings is higher than Game of Thrones, that's high praise. And I've grown to really enjoy a Game of Thrones a lot. But I do think Clash of Kings, as the book kind of goes on, it starts to really delve into its, themes. It hits a lot of its plot twists, gets to what it's been building up to. I really feel like it does a great job of hitting those things. That's not to say Game of Thrones doesn't do those things. I really enjoy Game of Thrones as well. It's just a preference thing, right? I like what a Clash of Kings does more than a Game of Thrones. But I will see you guys all in either tomorrow or the following Game of Thrones rereads, or again next week with my Clash of Kings reread for Catelyn 2.